This is the one that I kind of got excited about, because it really shows, as we move into the digital world, and digital media and the digital media mix, that it's viral too. We're using the internet. So a digital out-of-home campaign drove internet traffic. Okay? So we're starting to see the connectivity between the two. I mean, for search to go up 20%, I think that's pretty incredible. It speaks a lot about those different groups. And then I think the last was motivation to act. Post-campaign, there was an uptick on, I don't have statistics for how much money was invested, but again, it was a huge success for the organization and also for Team Fox. Now, those were all the great things about it. So what about the dirty little secret? Well, the dirty little secret was it was a pain. It was very difficult to do this. 22 member companies, 2 agencies. I can't tell you the numbers of pieces of creative that were necessary. The manual process to get it to the different groups. The reporting back. The proof of performance statistics. Mining the data. It's no wonder you guys wouldn't buy it. So we had to come up with, so what the learning was is that we have to embrace the standards and we have to embrace technology in order to get us here. The medium is there. The mass reach is there. But there were some major learnings from technology. I always say it would kind of like having 20 different internets. Would online advertising work? Probably not. There's one internet. There's a way to get it there. There's a way to get the information back. The information is mined. So what we saw was that digital out-of-home, we've been trying to do a digital out-of-home like an analog media. We were trying to do it like a traditional media. We're trying to make a digital technology-driven media like a traditional buy. I don't think it can happen. And I think part of that is because as a new market, we're trying to comply with what's already being done. And I think the internet changed a lot of that. And I don't think we have to. But I think we need the media world's buy-in that this really works. So again, I think this was a great example, probably the best thing we ever did. And for me, the result that we got out of it was what was broken, what we need to fix. Because I think we all bought into that this would work. So when we look at the different conclusions, again, I kind of went through them, but for me, the Google search was the most important. We didn't implement any mobile into the campaign. I wish we would have done mobile. That would have been very interesting to see what we could have done with the mobile device. But this really showed where, when you look through a pattern of a day, what somebody does, and then what actually you can get from that, not even in measured of uplift of sales, but just in awareness. I'll talk about some individual networks that have been fairly successful in the U.S. Over the past, some of them are new, some of them about 10 years old. One of the largest networks in the U.S. and I would say most successful in a lot of different ways is a company called Accent Health. And Accent Health has a doctor's office network that they operate 4 distinct channels depending on the type of specialty of the practice. And they have 12,000 locations or doctor's offices where they have a monitor that sits in a waiting room. They've eliminated all the paper inside of the doctor's office. So it's only a screen. And what they do is they run a 1-hour loop with 44 minutes of content and 16 minutes of advertising. And the content that they use is sponsored by CNN. They use Dr. Sanjay Gupta to do very specific segments depending on flu season and others, and then they marry that with the advertising. They started their business about 10 years ago, and it was a DVD-delivered network. So every 30 days, they would do a program, the 1-hour program, and they would actually deliver it to the doctor's office. They did their Nielsen research. The pharmaceutical companies, really bought into the medical marketplace as far as digital out-of-home. But they were having a problem because they could only get 70% of their rate card because they didn't have any compliance. They didn't know when the TVs were on, when they were off, if the ad played, if it didn't play. So they had to move into the digital world. So last year they converted 6,000 of those locations to digital. They went out to the market with Nielsen to do a study and get a 99% compliance rating, and they'll do the rest of that conversion this year. Huge success story, because now they just picked up about $4 million of profit just by getting the compliance rating. So they were able to go do that. So very successful network. They've got another really interesting statistic is 85% of the people, they get 18 million people a month, 18.5 million people a month. 85% of those people, within 1 hour, go get their prescription filled. So now what they're starting to do is look into the interactivity between the pharmacy and the doctor's office. You know, again, what laws will allow. Another network owned by Destination Media is Gas Station TV. And I've learned in my time here that our petrol or gas stations are very different than yours here. They both pump gas, but we pump our gas and you don't. So there's a big difference there. However, so you'll see here that this is a consumer doing it. And here at the gas station is it's a market that's well sought after in the U.S. as far as the consumer. 30 million people view gas station TV. I'll talk about another one called Outcast, the two largest. And here's an example where in both the gas stations, this company, Gas Station TV, and the next company that I'll show you, Outcast, both have a major broadcasting network that provides content. So I think 5 years ago we all saw the trend where the TV, the broadcasting companies, were taking their content and putting it into digital out of home. And that actually set us back as an industry. Why did it set us back? Because 30-second commercials don't work in digital out of home. You don't have that much time. And the TV commercial itself, I mean, there's only 5 seconds of good information. So how are you going to affect the consumer? So they did invest in these networks from a content and advertising perspective and have provided content. And I think what's happened is over the past couple of years, they've started to develop their own content, custom content. So when you look at some of the results, I'm not going to read them. Again, you can see them from here. But what I'll point out is what I found is interesting is when you look at the case study side, you basically have two of their case studies that they highlight. Again, one uses mobile as a metric. The other uses the internet. So this market, or this network that sees 30 million people every month was able to drive 185,000 entries to AOL. It was also able to get a 400% uplift in sales on ringtones. So again, consumer at the pump did a download. So I thought that was really interesting because, you know, we all talk about sales uplift. And I think, again, from a brand's perspective, you know, we'll get there, but we're not there yet. But what can we actually measure that's acceptable? And I think some of these things really make a lot of sense. The other network, which is in gas stations, is called Outcast. And I just highlight some things about them. And again, this is a U.S.-only network where, you know, what they did here is they obviously went through a Nielsen study. And to note, Nielsen did the Outcast and Arbitron did the study for Gas Station TV. So both were measured by credible research agencies. You can see the mix of people, the income of the person. So they've identified that. They've also, the research shows that 91% notice the screens. So obviously they've mastered the dwell time. They understand the consumers there. Again, the other statistics, you know, just make sense and they're consistent with the other network. What you'll see here is I've got a couple of their actual case studies where they drove product sales. So here with Tropicana, they increased 42%. And what's interesting is obviously the content is custom content. See, I think what we're finding is where a lot of the networks were using TV programming as filler, they're now seeing that a low-cost content solution that's being driven by the market is what's effective. We don't have to do high production. I think the days of going into the HD production suite are probably over for most of the content. And simple messaging, short messaging is driving results. So remember, these screens are at the pump. They had to leave the pump to go inside. So I thought it was pretty significant. The other one was with Nestle, where they increased at 13% increase where the ads were running. And again, here's a piece of creative that they got from the agency, and they just tweaked it. They just changed it a little bit and then put it up. And these are 15-second ads. I bet you the production cost in U.S. dollars is about $200. So inexpensive way to get a messaging out. This one was really interesting to me because this is where NBC, who sponsors the content for this network, created custom content specifically for the gas station network. To me, significant because they're not just sending down content anymore as filler. And a PSA warning is a public service announcement in the U.S. That's what PSA stands for. So it was a public service announcement. NBC created the content and basically got a 45% increase on custom content by NBC. So I think that the TV program and the TV companies are starting to understand that everything is changing. Not, the content that they have today on the TV, they can't use that advertising either. They are having to change the way they do it on TV, and they're having to change the way they do it if they're going to participate in digital out-of-home. Another network that's interesting because they use technology as the draw is a company called LevelVision. LevelVision reaches about 20 million college students a month. And it's a floor mat that literally is right in front of the cash register, so you have to step on it. And it's very flat. It probably is only up about a couple centimeters, but you don't want to step on it, so you see it. There's no doubt you see it. It's distracting. It's disruptive technology. But they did their studies with Arbitron, so they used a credible research group to do this. They use the OVAB metrics. All these companies are using the OVAB metrics for audience. So when I'm giving you these figures, this is, again, going with the average unit audience metric that we developed. They have a very mixed age and gender that go into the bookstores. But what's interesting is that with this group, they spend 10 to 20 minutes in this bookstore, and they come at least 2 to 3 times. So they had a challenge as far as refreshing content. So they had to do a very dynamic loop structure. Again, college, we're dealing with the age group that can multitask 8 things, where we can only multitask 4. So it had to be very varied in what they did. I think from a constructive criticism, I think they should have more local in this model. But again, they were trying to do a 5-minute loop that was refreshed pretty consistently, and really what they saw changing over time, and what's changed about this is they've had to implement more news, weather, updating information, just because, again, to be able to go out and update content on a frequent basis is pretty expensive. So again, they're still working out the model, but yet they found an audience that the advertisers really want. And lastly, trying to take you through a bunch of different vertical markets, there's a company called Zoom Media. And Zoom Media runs 3 different networks, Fitness, Social, and Active Family. And they've built their business, digital out-of-home. They already have a strong static business. So one of the other things that we see that I've seen as a trend is where companies that are either DVD delivered or static advertising that already have a good advertising base have now started to complement that strategy with digital. So when you look at Zoom Media, they're reaching 45 million 18 to 34-year-olds every month. So they have across the United States, they're pretty well distributed. Again, I believe one of the most sought after demographics everywhere. And I think what's interesting is I go through these different companies to give you a perspective of the North American market. Everywhere in the world, it's the same verticals. It's the same type of networks, just in different places. And that's one of the really interesting things about this market and all the travels I've done globally is that we also face the same challenges. So when you look at these networks, they've had some of the challenges that you've had in the market.